Hello, everybody. Hello to the watchers there. Hello, and welcome. We are doing chapter 7 today. Okay, very important topic. This is all about marital issues. This discussion. Okay, so I want to make that clear that this discussion that we're looking at is all about marital issues, marital topics. Okay, so marriage topics, in other words. Okay, so let's begin. Chapter 7. Okay, here we go. Now, concerning the things of which you wrote to me, so that means that he's answering a letter that they wrote to him. Okay, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Now, obviously, this is referring to sexual. Okay, it's good for a man to avoid sexually touching a woman. Okay, why? Because touch is one of the triggers for sex. Let me give you an example. When many people will say, oh, yeah, sure, we'll just kiss. We will just kiss, and that's all that we're going to do is we're just going to kiss. And we're going to sit here kissing, and nothing's going to happen. Ain't wrong. Now, if you have good self-control, okay, if you have good self-control of yourself, you might be able to resist for a limited time to touching a woman if she's in your presence. But let me put it this way. If you're in a relationship, it's going to be bloody hard. In other words, it's going to be very, very, very hard to avoid any sort of sexual contact if you are constantly touching the person. Why? Because one of the senses that turns you on is touch. Okay? And intimacy also brings that whole realm together of sexuality. Okay? Many people will tell you they fall into the mistake of having sex because they start kissing. They just decide, oh, I just want to kiss you a little bit. Okay? But then they cross that threshold and then they find themselves having sex. Okay? So he's saying it is good that a man avoid physical touch with a woman. Now, this is directly referring to outside of marriage. Okay? Not inside of marriage. Nevertheless, meaning even though this is the case, that it's good for a man not to touch a woman, because of sexual immorality, in other words, because of the desires of a man's heart and a woman's heart to desire sexual intercourse, to desire romance and cuddling and all these things, okay? But that's not sexual immorality. Let me put it this way. Cuddling, kissing, and romance outside of marriage would be sexual immorality. It would be included inside of sexual immorality. Hello, little mama. We are in the second verse already. You were a little bit delayed, so I understand. Anyway, he says, because of sexual immorality, in other words, for the reason of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife. In other words, if God gives you a wife, let that man have a wife. Okay? And let each woman have her own husband. In other words, it's God's desire that you be married together. Okay? That's talking about the goal of what God desires for your life. That God wants you to be together with someone. Okay? Now, this is directly tied to many other Bible verses. One of them comes to the very top of my head immediately, which is, it is not good for a man to be alone. Okay? As well as another one that says, if you burn with passion, you should get married. Okay? Now, this is directly talking about marriage. This whole topic area is talking about marriage. Okay? So we have to look at, when it talks about it is good for a man not to touch a woman, okay? But that's because there's no verses yet. There's no verses as far as Old Testament verses yet. But we're in the second verse of chapter 7. That's what I'm talking about. Anyway, in verse 1, it says, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Now, this would make a lot of sense, because how do you end up falling into temptation? touching a woman touching a man. You get the idea. Okay. Everything starts off, oh, we were just cuddling. Oh, we were just kissing. Next thing you know, boom, I'm pregnant. You get the idea. Okay. So because of sexual immorality, let each person have their own spouse, basically. Okay. Verse 3. Let the husband render to his wife the affection due her. Now, render, you stupid computer. Okay, the word render definition, the word render, okay. Remember that, because that came up from before in the Bible. Remember, render to Caesar's what is Caesar's, and to God's what is God. Render means provide or give. Provide or give. That's what render means. Provide or give. Okay? Provide or give. So, here it says, let the husband, that's talking about the husband, the spouse. It uses the word husband, not boyfriend, not someone you're dating, not someone you're hooking up with, but husband. Let your husband render to his wife, give, in other words, give to his wife what? The affection due to her, the attention, the romance, okay? All the love and affection and time, okay? He should make her one of his highest priorities, okay? In other words. So husband, render to his wife, right? If she's not your wife, you don't render her nothing, okay? You can give her things, but you're not, the word here would be you're not obligated to give her things until she becomes your wife, okay? Once she becomes your wife, you have a duty to take care of her needs, okay? And that includes her emotional needs, her sexual needs, everything, okay? This is why sex inside of marriage is blessed, okay? And likewise, that means in the same way, also the wife to her husband means the wife needs to render to her husband the affection and respect and everything else that is due to him, okay? That's what this is saying. Now, if you ever thought that, oh, okay, once you're married, guess what? I'm still me. No, you're not. I will show you why. Verse 4. The wife does not have authority. She doesn't have control. She might have physical control over her own body, but it means her body is not hers alone. So her making choices and going, well, I wanted to have an abortion because it's my body. No, you're married. Your body now also belongs to your husband. That's what the Bible says. Okay? So the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. In basic terminology, it's simply saying, you don't just belong to you alone when you're married. So, example, if I'm married, my wife does have control of her own body. She has free will. She can do with her body whatever she chooses. That is correct. That doesn't go away, regardless. But she doesn't just belong to herself anymore. Now she belongs to me if she's my spouse. And vice versa. And when I'm married, I no longer just belong to me. I belong also to my spouse. Okay? We are literally property of one another. Okay? Verse 5. Do not deprive one another. Deprive means, let's see, I think it's like reject or deny. So the word I would use for deprive is deny. Do not deprive, do not deny, do not deprive, do not deny one another, except, now, with consent for a time. So what is it talking about? Well, deprive the spouse of what? We'll find out, okay? That you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer. Meaning the purpose of depriving each other of whatever the purpose to deprive each other of what we're going to find out it's talking about is for the purpose of fasting and prayer. So if it's not for the purpose of fasting and prayer, you should not be denying your spouse. So when you discover this topic, okay, it is when it means deprive one another, it is talking about sexual intercourse. It means you should not deprive your spouse of having sex. Now, does this mean that a wife, whenever the husband goes, okay, babe, I want sex, if she's not in the mood for it, does that mean that she should give him sex? I believe not. But she should take it under importance. Meaning she should take his request of value. Okay? She should say to herself, okay, my husband has stated his marital needs. And I do have to take that into account and can't just be thinking about myself. Okay? You understand that? So, again, when it says do not deprive one another, it's talking about sex with your spouse. Don't deprive your spouse. Don't deny your spouse sex. It is not talking about that you have to jump every time they want sex. That's not what it's meaning. Okay? What it's referring to here of do not deprive each other of sex is this. And we find out why it says that later. So let's continue with the verse first. And come together again. Come together again means have sex again. So that Satan, so there's the reason why, so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Remember, it's because of the lack of self-control that verse 2 says, because of sexual immorality. It's because of your lack of self-control. Okay? So, there is an old verse here, I believe. I believe this is an Old Testament verse. I'm going to go ahead and put it in, and little mama can correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe it's an Old Testament verse. It's Joel 2:16. Okay? Joel 2:16 for that. Okay? Because of your lack of self-control. Okay? So, now let's dig into this just a little bit. Let's dig into this and get out what we need from this. Okay? So, does that mean that as a spouse, anytime your man says, hey, I'm horny, give me sex, does that mean that you have to do it? No, you have free will. Okay? If something's going on, or you're busy or something, obviously, like, let's give an example. If you're in the middle of a market, right, and he gets horny, obviously you can't meet his needs out in public. You get the idea, okay? So there's a time and place for that. And that is when you're home and when, if you have kids, when the kids are sleeping or off to school or something, you need to find time to give to your spouse, okay? Obviously, this also doesn't mean that the man has the right to demand her to give him sex. Like, you're going to give me sex whether you like it or not. Okay? That is not what it's meaning. Okay? Let me say this again. This verse is not meant to be a hammer to force anyone to have sex. Because to force someone to have sex is the definition of the word rape. Okay? So, but I say this as consension, not as a commandment. In other words, I say this as advice, not as a commandment. Okay? In other words, this whole section that he's giving information about, he's not saying that's a commandment. Okay? He's saying it's advice. It's how you make sure to avoid issues. Why? Let me tell you why. If you're denying your partner sex for any other reason other than to draw closer to the Lord in fasting and prayer, then you're opening the door to Satan to come in and to tempt your spouse. So let me give you a scenario, okay? Let's say the husband is mad at his wife, okay? And he goes a week without giving her sex, okay? So now during that entire week, she is horny, more horny than usual because her sexual desires while she's married is not being it's not being met. So unless she decides to masturbate, okay, then her hormones are going to be going crazy, which means it's going to be more easier for Satan to tempt her with sex with someone outside of her marriage. There's a lot, and we see that in the world a lot. There's people going around going, okay, my spouse is not giving me sex. Okay, I'm going to go get it from somebody else. So they decide to throw away morals and to commit sexual immorality as well as adultery, to have sex with someone who's not their spouse because their spouse isn't doing the job. This is why when you're married, you need to listen to your partner. You need to listen to what they're saying. Not just talk, but listen to them. Listen to the fact that they're saying, sweetie, I'm horny. Now, normally people don't just come out right out and say that. Okay, they really don't. Usually they'll give some sort of clue. What I mean? Well, if you're at home and you're married, you might see your wife walking around in something that she knows you find sexy. Okay? Or at night, she might just, you guys are cuddling, watching a movie. Next thing you know, she's kissing on your neck, right? Kissing on your body. Okay? That's an indicator that she wants to get intimate. Okay? Remember, 95% of talking is nonverbal. It's through the body. Maybe 90%. Maybe not so much 95, but 90%. A lot of the communication between people are non-physical. Non-verbal. Meaning, it's not with words. Words only is a small portion of communication. Yes, words and talking is important, right? But how many of you have felt this? Okay, you've been in a relationship, right? And the person you've been in a relationship with, they didn't say anything, but they just come up and hold you in their arms, okay? Or you hold them in your arms, right? And how much of that, just the holding, tells you, wow, this person really cares about me. They really love me. They're really interested in me. You get the idea, okay? That's how you avoid issues arising where cheating happens, by making sure that your spouse gets the desires you need. So, how do I know this? Because this is one of the problems that occurred in my marriage. I constantly would deny my spouse, because I wasn't physically attracted to her, okay, sex. And because I did that, she felt the need to cheat with other men. Okay? Now, I forgive her for that, but you get the idea. My actions directly opened the door to my spouse feeling pressured by other men to have sex. Okay? Now continue on in verse 7. For I wish that all men were even as I myself, but each one has his own gift from God. One in this manner and another in that manner. Okay, so remember we've been talking about the body of Christ and how we're all different parts of the body of Christ, right? That's tied to this, okay? Each one has his own gifts. What my gifts are not going to be what your gifts are. I'm good with artwork. I'm good with math. I'm good with science, okay? I'm good with cooking. I'm good with video games. I'm good with explaining in easy terms, right? Things. Easy explanations, okay? But what I'm not good at is singing. I love to sing, but I'm not good at it. I don't have a gift for it, okay? You get the idea? So now he talks about so now he's moved from the marriage and talking about two other sections. So listen to this. But I say to the unmarried, that's people that are single, okay, and to the widows, that would be people whose spouses have died. It is good for them if they remain even as I am. The word even as I am means single. So Paul committed himself to being single, okay, to not being attached to any woman, so he can give his full attention to God. So when he says, I wish that all men were even as I myself, meaning he wishes that all men could be single and have good self-control, but not all men are made that way, okay? Some men do not have good sexual self-control, okay? But he says to the unmarried, to the people that are single, and to the widows who don't have a spouse because their spouse has died, it is good for them if they remain as I am, which is to be single. But if they cannot, meaning if they cannot be single, but listen to what it says. I just said if they cannot be single. Why do I say that? By what it says here. But if they cannot exercise self-control over what? Over the body. In other words, if they cannot control their sexual desires, let them marry. Okay? Let them be married. For it is better, there's that verse I was talking about, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So how do I know that I was designed for marriage? Me, Kevin. How do I know that? Because I burn with passion. I burn with passion. Okay? I burn with passion, and I don't have very good self-control over my desire, over that specific desire. Okay? I'm honest about that. Okay? So it is good that I become married someday. Now, granted, I've been waiting for 8 years, and it still hasn't happened. But you get that general idea. Okay? Now we move on to the next section. Keeping your marriage vows. These are the promises you make when you're married. Remember, when you get married, for better or worse, richer or poorer, sickness and in health, till death do us part. Forsaking all others. Okay? So on and so on. Now, to the married, so now he's talking directly to the married people. I command, meaning he's giving you a command by God. Okay? Yet not I, but the Lord. That's how you know where it's coming from. He's saying, I'm not the one giving them command. The Lord is. The Lord is just using my mouth to deliver the commandment. A wife is not to depart from her husband. Do you know what that means? The wife should not separate or divorce from her husband unless under cheating circumstances. Okay? How do I know that? Because this verse has to be tied to the verse that Jesus said, which is, except for sexual immorality, except for sexual unfaithfulness inside of a marriage, marital unfaithfulness, you are not allowed to divorce, right? This would be tied to that, okay? So you have to tie them together, okay? That a wife is not supposed to separate or leave her husband, and vice versa. The husband's not supposed to do that on a wife either, unless there is sexual cheating. And this can be cheating of the heart, cheating of, what I mean by cheating of the heart is, instead of going to your wife, telling your wife all your emotional day-to-day things, you're going to somebody else and tell them, oh, I had a good day today, I had a bad day today, this happened, this happened. So you're opening up the door for temptation with someone else instead of your spouse. Your spouse is supposed to be that person that you are closest with, that you tell everything to. Okay? And by the way, that is an indicator, that is an indicator to know if someone is on the good right track to becoming your spouse. Is if you are able to open up everything to them and tell them everything. Okay? If you are able to do that. So, how would I say this? When God brings someone into your life that he wants you to marry, you're going to be able to open up to them about anything and everything. They're going to know you're good. They're going to know you're bad. They're going to know all of this because you're going to share with them all of this. You're going to feel this level of comfort and openness with them. Okay? And then you look for the other signs. Okay? Are you both single? Do you both desire marriage? Because that's not always the case. Okay? And he says, for even if she does depart, meaning even if she leaves, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled back to her husband. So, again, this is tied to the fact that this verse right here that we just read is verse 11. It's tied to the fact, okay, of marital unfaithfulness. Remember, marital unfaithfulness, basically cheating, okay, is the exception that God gives for divorce as well as separation, okay, of your spouse, okay? So aside from that, you're not allowed to separate. Here it goes into more detail, and it tells you, okay, But if she does depart, if she does separate or leave her husband, and this would also apply to a man leaving his wife, let them remain unmarried, okay? So let them remain single, or be reconciled back to their spouse, okay? And a husband is not to divorce his wife, okay? A husband is not to divorce his wife. Luckily, in my case, I didn't file the divorce. Even though there was cheating that occurred in my marriage, I'm not the one that filed the divorce. She did. So I can be happy about that I didn't initiate the divorce. I had thought about it many times. I applied for the divorce many times back years ago, but I could never go through with it, okay? Because I believed in what God said about marriage, okay? Anyway, so let me clarify this for you. In this verse, we are learning that if a spouse separates from their spouse, okay, if one spouse separates from their spouse or divorces their spouse, they are supposed to stay unmarried or be reconciled. That means be married again to their spouse, okay? Then he talks to the rest of them. But to the rest, I, not the Lord, talk about where the message is coming from. If any brother has a wife who does not believe, that would be does not have faith, and she is willing to live with him, let him not divorce her. So this would be indicator, the general explanation of this would be a husband. Let's give the example of a husband. So a husband who's a Christian, married to a woman who's not a Christian, and she doesn't want a divorce, then the Christian man is not supposed to divorce her. So how would that come about? How would you be in a situation like that? Here's one example. Both of them, when they get married, they're not saved, okay? Then after they get married, at some point, the man or the woman becomes saved. So that makes it to where one's saved, the other one's not. The other one is still learning. At that point, you start realizing, okay, at that point, there's going to be some friction because now one of the spouses who's not married, one of the spouses who's not saved is going to be looking at the spouse who's saved and going, you're changing on me, I don't like it, okay? But if that person who's not saved wants to still stay married, then you are obligated by the Lord to stay married to them, okay? And a woman who has a husband who does not believe. So they're applying it differently. So if any brother, that would mean any man, has a wife who is not a believer, but he is a believer, because it uses the word brother, and brother is one of the terminologies for Christian. So if any Christian has a wife who does not believe, and that unbeliever is willing to live with him and be married to him, let him not divorce her. And it also applies vice versa. And a woman who has a husband who does not believe, that would mean he's not a Christian, okay? If he is willing to live with her, let her not divorce him. Now, when it says live with, it's not talking about, I'm not married to you, but I'm going to live with you and be with you. Why? Because you can't divorce someone that you're not married to. So when it says, let him not divorce her, let her not divorce him, this is talking about marriage, okay, in the realm of marriage. So if a believer finds themselves in some sort of circumstance where they are married to an unbeliever for whatever reason, okay, then they have to go to that person and say, hey, I'm now a Christian, you're not. Do you still want to be married? Okay. Now it talks about a very specific thing. Listen to this. Now, do you remember what the Bible says about two will become one flesh, right? That means God sees you as one. When God looks at a married couple, he looks at the two people as one flesh, as one person, one heart, one united heart, one family. Okay. Now, this goes deeper than just one family, though. This is, God looks at the two. He sees you as individuals, yes, because he talks to you both individually in that marriage, right? He talks to the wife in her heart. He talks to the man in his heart, okay, in his mind, so on and so forth. They each come to know the Lord and listen to the Lord, okay? But This is talking about an unbelieving husband. Okay, so if you're in a situation where one is married, if you're in a situation where they both are married to each other, and one's a Christian, the other one's not a Christian, then the one who's not a Christian is sanctified. That means to be made holy by the spouse who's sanctified. So, an example. If I'm a Christian and I'm married to a person who's not a Christian, then my wife is, because she's married to me and one flesh with me, according to God, she is now put on my credit. Does that make sense? Just as we are put on Christ's credit, right? She is put on my credit. And if I'm the unbeliever and she's married and she's the believer, I'm put on her credit. This is why this says this. For the unbelieving husband, the one that doesn't believe, is sanctified, to be made pure, holy, and cleansed by the wife, by the heart, and by the salvation of the wife. And the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband, who's a believer. Otherwise, your children would be unclean. So this is telling you why God sanctifies one spouse by the faith of another spouse. Okay, so one spouse has faith, the other one doesn't. Because they're joined together, God sees them as one. And because he sees them as one, he credits the unbelieving wife to the credit of the believing husband, and he credits the unbelieving husband to the credit of the unbelieving wife. Okay? I mean, to the credit of the believing wife. Sorry. I'm getting tongue-tied today. I don't know why. Okay? Anyway. Now, the reason why God does this is what it says after that. Otherwise, if God did not do this, your children would be unclean. They would not be clean in the eyes of God. But now they are holy. Okay? So God sanctifies the entire family through one. Okay? One spouse sanctified can save the entire household. Okay? Now there's a verse here. I don't know if Little Mama is still here, but it is going to drop it here in a second as soon as I put it in the comments, just in case Little Mama's not here. There we go. It is Malachi 2:15. Malachi 2:15. Okay? But if the unbeliever, if the person who's not a believer departs, that means decides to divorce, okay? Let him depart, meaning let that person divorce. Don't fight against it, okay? A brother or a sister, that means a believer, is not under any obligation. It says under bondage in such cases. But when it says bondage, it means you're not held to be obligated to be married to that person, right? In other words, the marriage rules that says don't divorce unless cheating has happened, that doesn't apply when one of the people in the marriage is an unbeliever, and and the one who's an unbeliever wants to divorce. Okay, do you get that? So let me give you some. If I'm a believer, okay, and I'm married to an unbelieving woman, she can decide to stay with me, and I should not break up with her. I should not divorce her if she desires to stay, okay, and work it out. Because maybe down the road she will get saved. We don't know, okay? But if she decides, I'm an unbeliever, I can't see myself being married to someone who's a believer because I don't believe the same way, I'm not going to get saved, she can divorce the man, and the man should allow that divorce to happen because he's not obligated, okay, to the unbelief. He's not under that kind of bondage of the Bible that says you should not divorce for any reason other than cheating, okay? In other words, that rule does not apply when one of them is an unbeliever. It only applies when both are believers. Okay? This is why 1 Corinthians, Paul gives explanation to certain circumstances that would happen where one's a believer, the other one's an unbeliever. Okay? So an example of this is maybe in Paul's time, many Christians were being saved, right? So maybe in Paul's time, many of the households who were once worldly right? Where a man and a woman who neither one of them had faith got married, right? And they're married before one of them gets saved. Now one of them gets saved because they run into Jesus or they run into Paul, right? So now one of the spouses is saved. That would kind of indicate why he's saying this type of stuff, okay? He's giving better explanations for circumstances that are not normally said beforehand, okay? Now, okay, if the unbeliever departs, that means divorce, let them divorce. A brother or sister is not under the rule, bondage, in such cases. But God has called us to peace. God has called us to be peaceful. Okay, peaceful and loving. Okay, we're not to, first of all, even setting the Bible aside for a minute, you should never try to force someone to stay with you if they don't want to stay with you. You get the idea? Okay. Yeah, baby. Yeah. You should never force someone to stay married to you or be with you if they don't want to, okay? Sorry. Hey, kitty. Sorry about that. Slight distraction from the kitty cat. Anyway. Okay, anyway. Continuing on, okay? For how do you know, a wife, whether you will save your husband? In other words, if you're a believing wife and your husband's not a believer, how do you know if you will save your husband or not? In other words, how do you know whether or not, one way or another, in other words, if your actions will play sometime in the future to your spouse being saved? You don't know. Or how do you know, or husband, whether you will save your wife? This is why this is being said, that if they want to stay, let them stay, because maybe down the road they will see your faith, they will see how convicted you are, they will see how strong your faith is and trust is in the Lord, and that will motivate them to become saved. Okay? You don't know that. This is why we're also, but this is directly talking about, you don't know the future of your spouse. So if they want to stay, let them stay, because maybe down the road, God's going to save them through your actions. Okay? Next section. Live as you are called. Okay? That's the title. Verse 17. But as God has distributed to each one of you, to each one, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk. Meaning whatever path God has chosen for you, you should walk in the path that God sets. You should not try to walk in the path that God sets for somebody else. Okay? And so I ordain in all the churches. Okay? I ordain. I give authority to people in all the churches. Okay? So the word ordain means like ordained minister, right? You have become an official minister, right? In a way, God has ordained me to be an authority to teach the people in this ministry, okay? Not ordained by the laws of man, where I have a degree or any of that, but ordained by his Spirit, okay? Was anyone called while circumcised, meaning while they were circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised, okay? Was anyone called while uncircumcised? Let him not be circumcised. In other words, if God calls you, it's not going to matter your physical body. Okay? Now this part that he's talking about is directly talking to the people of that time about circumcision and people that are not circumcised. Because according to the Bible, of the Old Testament rules, right, you could only be a believer and saved if you were circumcised. So what he's saying here is that don't focus on whether someone's circumcised or not to determine if they're called by God. That is something that is determined of the heart now, because circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing. In other words, the circumstances of a person is not what matters. What matters is the fact that God calls them. Okay? But keeping the commandments of God is what matters. That means God tells you to do something, you should do it. What are the commandments of God? Jesus made it very clear. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you obey these two, you're going to be able to obey all of the 10 commandments and even more. Okay? Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. Okay? So that means whatever God has called you in, you should stay in that calling. If God has called you to be a singer, you should stay in that gift of being a singer. You should not quit on it. If God has called you and given you the gift of being a minister or a pastor, you should stay in that gift. You should not quit on it just because it gets hard. Okay? So to give an example here. Were you called, meaning were you saved while a slave? Do not be concerned about it, meaning do not be concerned that you're a slave. But if you can be made free, rather use it. Okay, so if you're able to be made free and made no longer a slave, then go ahead. It's a good thing. Okay, so for me, this is really just getting at the heart of your circumstances in life doesn't really matter. You know, how you came, what exact way you came to becoming saved in the Lord doesn't really matter. So how would I put that in today's terms, in the lifestyle we live in today? Okay, so let me put it this way. When he's talking about, are you circumcised, don't be blah, 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 right? I'm not going to go into the whole spiel, but you get the idea. The way that would be today would be like this. Oh, you're not a Baptist, so you can't be a minister. You need to be a Baptist to be a minister. Oh, I see. You are a Lutheran. Oh, I'm sorry, you're a Lutheran. You can't be a minister. You have to be a servant. Okay? God is the one that gives to each person the gifts that he chooses, and he is the one who dictates what someone's role is. Remember, he made you for a reason, for a purpose. He designed you for a specific purpose. And as your life continues, he slowly draws out that purpose and reveals that purpose to you. Okay? For he who is called in the Lord, whether that person is slave, for he who is called in the Lord, that means called to be saved, while a slave is the Lord's freedman. So even though the person may still be a slave in circumstances, in the spirit of the Lord, they're absolutely free. Okay? Likewise, he who is called while free, while completely free, right, is Christ's slave. Now you remember what Paul often calls himself. I am prisoner of the Lord. You see the connection? Christ's slave. Prisoner of the Lord. Christ's slave. Prisoner of the Lord. You get the idea, okay? You were bought at a price. You are now God's property. Do not become slaves of men. Do not become obedient to the whims, to every desire and every want of men. In other words, you should obey God first. Men, you should only give respect and reverence and honor to and love to. But you are not meant to obey man as if man is your God. Okay? Now this is going to become a key part in the future when the tribulation time comes, which is very near actually. Okay? When the tribulation time comes, this is going to come. Okay? And this is going to play a big part, okay, of the situation. Because if we look at our circumstances to determine our identity with Christ and where we stand with Christ by our circumstances, then there's going to be so many people that's going to fall away from the faith the moment that things get difficult. And even the Bible indicates that. Jesus said there are seeds that fall on the road. There are seeds that fall among the thorns, and they die out. There are seeds that this. There are seeds that that. You get the idea, okay? You were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. In other words, in that tribulation time, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be happening. We're going to come across a one world money system where the same money for the entire world, okay? We're going to come across religion going bye-bye. And if you're seen as a person who is religious, they're going to persecute you, put you in prison, possibly kill you, okay? Beat you and do all sorts of stuff against you. You get the idea, okay? It's not going to get easy. They're also going to demand that you get a mark on your forehead or your right hand. And if you don't, you can't pay your bills, you can't buy food, you can't rent a home, you can't do anything. We're going to end up, basically, we're going to be ending up living in the wildernesses, okay? Because we're not going to be able to take, we're going to be living in, basically, it's going to be like olden days, where we're living in caves and huts and man-made shelters of sticks and stuff like that, okay? Because we're not going to be able, and as far as the food goes, we're going to have to forage and plant stuff and grow stuff ourselves if we want to eat. So many people are going to go hungry or have difficulties because they're not going to know how to do that, okay? Brethren, that means people of God. Let each one remain with God in that state in which he was called. So if you were called to be a minister, be a minister. If you were called to be a pastor, be a pastor. If you were called to be a singer, be a singer. If you were called to be a servant that serves other people, be a servant. If you were called, so whatever gift God and desires God has given you, follow that. That's God's calling for you, okay? Then he goes on to talk more to the unmarried and the widows. So here's another section to the unmarried and the widows. In other words, to the single people and the people who are widowed, okay? Now concerning virgins, so that part's directly talking about virgins, okay? I have no commandment from the Lord, yet I give judgment as one whom the Lord in his mercy has made trustworthy. In other words, the Lord has entrusted me, okay? So I give judgment, okay? I suppose, therefore, that this is good because of the present distress, the present suffering of the world, basically. Think about it. How many virgins in this world do you know? Not many, okay? You get the idea, okay? So, here it says that it is good for a man to remain as he is, to remain single, to remain a virgin, if he can, okay? Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be loose. Meaning, if you have a wife, don't seek a divorce. If you have a spouse, don't seek a divorce, in other words. Are you loosed from a wife? Meaning, do you not have a spouse? Do not seek a wife. Okay? Now, this is powerful. What is this saying to us? It's saying, here's what it's generally saying. There is a time and season for everything. If God wants you to be married, he's going to make you married. Now, he's not going to force you to be married, but he's going to open the doors for you to be able to become married, if that's what he wants. But it's basically saying, whatever season that God has put you in, whether it's single or married, enjoy that area, okay? Now, many of you might have heard a version of this. How many of us have heard the saying, and our parents have told this to us, enjoy your youth while you have it, because it's not going to be there for long, right? They tell you, enjoy your childhood, right? But no, you're in such a rush to grow up. And then you realize, oh my gosh, I grew up, life is not really all that fun anymore. I have to pay bills, responsibilities, I don't like it, wish I was a kid again. It's the same here, okay? God has a specific time for you to be married, if that's his goal for your life, okay? And all that's going to be dependent on circumstances, okay? Example, if you have left your spouse, and then you're told by this chapter to either stay unmarried or go back to your spouse. And that's directly related to if no cheating has occurred. Okay? So cheating is a big indicator of whether you're even allowed to be divorced. Okay? But here he's talking about to the virgins, to the unmarried, and the widows. Okay? So, in other words, if you have a spouse, be happy in your marriage. If you don't have a spouse, be happy in your singleness. Now that's a hard one for me because I just really can't be happy. I find moments of happiness in my singleness. Like, I like the fact that I can stretch out all over the bed and I don't feel like crowded on the bed by having someone next to me. Although I kind of miss that at the same time. I don't have to check with people of what TV shows I want to watch, what movies I want to watch. Okay, you get the idea. There are perks. How would I say this to you this way? There are good things and bad things to being married, and there are good things and bad things to being single. In other words, there's pros and cons to both of them. In marriage, you have somebody else to have companionship with, you have someone else to bond with, you have someone else to share moments with, but it also means you have to take into account their feelings as well in that relationship. Okay? It's not just about you anymore. Okay? On top of that, now you can't devote all of your time to God. You now have to split your time between God and your spouse and your kids and everything else. Okay? If you're single, you have plenty of time for God. You can give all your time for God. But it can be kind of lonely at times. You can miss the romance. You can miss the affection. You can miss the cuddling. Okay? You get the general idea. Okay? But even if you do marry, so even if you marry, you have not sinned. Even if you marry, you have not done any kind of sin. You have not sinned by getting married. Now that's directly talking about man and woman getting married. This is not talking about man marrying a man. This is not talking about woman marrying a woman. Those are sin. The moment that a person marries same sex, they have committed a sin. Okay? But regular marriage, okay, is not a sin. You have not sinned by marrying, okay? And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. She has not sinned by marrying somebody, okay? Nevertheless, even though this is being the case that you have not sinned by marrying, okay, such will have trouble in the flesh. But I would spare you. Okay? In other words, if you're married, there's going to be trouble in the flesh. Why? Because you think differently than your spouse. Your spouse thinks differently than you. You guys don't think the same. You don't feel the same. You have different desires, different things you chase after, different things that you put more value on. Let me give you an example. With women, money is ranked as either number 1 or number 2 importance. Okay? As far as a relation. Now, I'm not talking about God. Okay? So I don't want you to think in that way. Okay? What I mean by importance is, aside from the realm of God, right? They did surveys in the world, in America, okay? And they asked women, what is the 3 top most important things to you? One of the like almost instantly, with almost every woman, the first thing out of their mouth was money. Right? With guys, the first thing out of their mouth was respect. Okay? Because guys value respect more than they value money. Guys can be with a broke woman who has no money and be completely happy as long as she gives him respect. A woman, she will find it hard to be with a guy that has no money, but doesn't really care all that much about respect usually. You get the idea. She would have more of a problem of being with someone who's broke than being with someone who disrespects her. Okay? You get the idea. Okay? So we're all different. Okay? So there's going to be trouble in the flesh. Not trouble in the spirit, not trouble in the marriage, trouble in the flesh. but I would spare you from this, is what he's saying. But this I say, brethren, that means brothers and sisters in Christ. The time is short, so that from now on, even those who have wives should be as though they had none. Okay? In other words, the time is coming near that the Lord is coming. So each of you should keep your eyes fixated on the Lord no matter what. Okay? Even if you're married. In other words, your spouse is important, but your spouse is not more important than Christ. Okay? Have no other gods before me. That includes your spouse. Okay? If you're obeying your spouse above God, above what God says, then you're not having God be your God. Your spouse is your God. Okay? Now, who weep? Those who weep as though they did not weep. Okay? So if you are sad for some reason, be happy. Because in your sadness, God is your joy. In other words, even though your situations might be hard, difficult, God is your joy. Don't be joyful about the circumstances. Be joyful about who's with you in the circumstances. Okay? Those who rejoice as though they did not rejoice. Those who buy as though they did not possess. Meaning your possessions are not all that important. So you have to buy something. Big deal. Life goes on. Things fade away. You lose stuff. Stuff breaks. Big deal. Okay? There's a time for rejoicing. There's a time for weeping. All of that's tied together. Okay? And those who use this world as not misusing it. Okay? So those who decide to use this world for their own purposes, to not be misusing it. For the form of this world is passing away. The ways of the world, the ways of sin, the ways of corrupted flesh, all of that, it's passing away. Little by little. How do we know? We see that. Look how much of this world has suffered and decayed due to mankind's sin, right? We have pollution. Okay? We have areas of the world where landfills, where it's a huge area of nothing but trash. Miles and miles of trash, right? Pollution in the air, smog. Think about this fact. Over the last 20 or 30 years, the temperature during summertime has greatly increased. How do I know this? Because the place where I'm at now, okay, if you had gone back 30 years ago, they would have Christmases that had snow, okay? In other words, because of pollution, there is a huge increase of the temperature. It's known as the greenhouse effect. And what it is the pollution caused by vehicles rises up and it gives carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide starts eating away at the ozone layer, which is the protective shield around our planet, okay? And that ozone layer is letting in more and more sun particles, which is heating up the world's temperature on a regular basis, okay? And I know this to be fact. Years ago, man, winters were awesome. Now, we barely get a winter, okay? I'm sure you guys have noticed it takes longer and longer and longer for the cold weather to get here. Like here it is, middle of November, and we're still having days here that are in their 60s or 70s. Okay? And I'm like, are you kidding me? It should be, right now where I'm at, it should be in the 30s during the daytime. And I'm talking about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It should be, that's what temperature should be, but it's not. Because of pollution, because of the eating away of the ozone layer. Okay? Let's continue. Okay? But I want you to be without care. Why? Because in the coming age, in the coming time of tribulation, it's going to be so hard to take care of other people, take care of yourself, and keep your faith. Okay? So let's listen to what he says. But I want you to be without care. He who is unmarried cares for the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord, how he may obey the Lord, how he may draw closer to the Lord. But he who is married cares about the things of the world, how to take care of his wife, how he may please his wife, right? So he cares about things that will pass away. There's nothing wrong in caring about it, but in other words, his attention is divided. His efforts are divided, okay? There is a difference between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman cares about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy, both in body and in spirit. But she who is married cares about the things of the world, how she may please her husband. Very simple. No, doesn't really need explanation. Very simple understanding. Okay? Again, same for the woman. Her attention is divided. She's no longer just going, okay, how can I draw closer to the Lord? How can I pray better? How can I do this? How can I be a better Christian? How can I do this? How can I do that? Now she's thinking, now that she's married, she's going, okay, well, I need to take care of my husband's needs because the Bible says to do it. I need to respect him. I need to obey him. I need to focus on him, but I also need to focus on God. So she's now divided in her attention, same as the man would be, okay? And this I say for your own profit, meaning for your own benefit. Not that I may put a leash on you. Not that I control you. Okay? Not that I will control you. Because I don't desire to control you. Okay? That's what he means by put a leash on you. I'm not trying to control you. But for what is prosper, meaning proper. What is proper? What is good for you? I want good for your life. Okay? And that you may serve the Lord without distraction, okay, without being distracted. But if any man thinks he is behaving improperly towards his virgin, right? So if he's not treating his wife, his spouse, or his lover the right way, if she is past the flower of her youth, that's talking about if she's no longer virgin, and thus it must be, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let him marry. Okay? So very simple put. If she's a virgin, she can give you something that no one else can give you. She can give you her first sexual experience when you're married together. Let me put it this way. If a woman is saving her virginity for you, and vice versa, if the man is saving his virginity for the woman, okay, he has something of great value to offer. And so does she, okay? Now, past the flower of her youth, that's directly talking about virginity, okay? If she has gone past that point and no longer virgin, okay, let him do what he wishes. He does not sin. Let them be married. Okay? Even this being the case, because it says here, nevertheless, meaning even though that this is the case, he who stands steadfast, that means strong and firm and committed in his heart, having no necessity, no distractions, but has power over his own will, that means he has good self-control, okay, and has so determined in his heart that he will keep his virgin or virginity, does well. If he has self-control and keeps his virginity, he has something amazing to say. So then, he who gives her in marriage does well. It does a good thing. But he who does not give her in marriage does better. Okay? Now that's all related to marriage, that the purpose of marriage, so what is it saying when it says, he that gives her in marriage does a good thing, but he who does not give her in marriage does better? Simple. if a father gives a daughter who is a virgin away, okay, that's a good thing. There's nothing sinful about it. But the father also has to understand that he's allowing her to be distracted and divided unto the Lord. Okay? Which is why it says, but if he does not give her in marriage, he does better. He does more better for her. Because now she doesn't need to be distracted by a husband. She can be single. Okay? A wife is bound by law, talk about the law of marriage, as long as her husband lives. This is directly why John had a problem with Herod and Herodias, because Herodias's husband, which is the brother of Herod, was not dead. Okay, but if her husband dies, that would make her a widow. She is at liberty to be married to whom she wishes. So she is allowed to remarry if she wants. The key indicator here is if he is dead, then she's allowed to remarry. Okay? So let me put it this way. If you find yourself separated or divorced, okay, you are told by God to stay single. Simple as that. Until the time comes that your spouse dies. If your spouse dies, you're free from that covenant of marriage, and then you are allowed to remarry. Okay? And the other exception to that is that if there's cheating that has taken place on either side, okay, then you are allowed by God to divorce biblically, even if that person is still alive. And you are committing no sin by doing it. Okay? Now, key word there is you're allowed. It doesn't mean you have to. There are many couples who have had cheating occurred in their marriage, and they have fought through that cheating, and they have rebuilt the trust between each other, and they have stayed married. Okay? A good example of that is my mother, who my stepdad has cheated on many times. Okay? And she has gone through a whole lot. She has chosen to stay with him. Okay? And they still have a marriage. Okay? They're still married. And somehow they worked through it. Okay? I can't say at what indicator of marriage they have, whether it's a very strong marriage or whether it's, built on God or not, but it's a marriage nevertheless. They've worked through it. Okay? But she is happier if she remains as she is. Happier as in happier pursuing God, happier focusing on the Lord. Okay? According to my judgment, according to what I believe, and I think I also have the Spirit of God. Okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of chapter 7. I will see you tomorrow for chapter 8, which will be actually a very short verse. A very short chapter. I'm looking at the chapter now. It's really short. Okay? And then we'll go into 9 and 10 and so on and so on. So, thank you, guys. Thank you, little mama, for watching. I hope that this has been helpful to you, as well as anybody else who watches this video. Thank you for your time. I'll see you later. Be blessed.